let me tell you about a President's Day sale from Big O Tires. No, listen to me. I'm the honest one. I got this, Abe. It's really no big deal.
I'll make the declaration. I'm on the $100 bill.
You're not even a president, Ben.
Now through February 22nd, buy 3, get 1 free of 4 select in-stock Big O branded tires with installation purchase. Big O Tires, the team you trust. Installation required. Disposal fees and shop fees extra where permitted. See store for pricing. Eligibility may vary. Not valid with.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 month, $90 for 6 month, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
This is Matt Rogers from Las Culturistas with Matt Rogers and Bowen Yang.
This is Bowen Yang from Las Culturistas with Matt Rogers and Bowen Yang.
Hey, so what if you could boost the Wi-Fi to one of your devices when you need it most?
Because Xfinity Wi-Fi can. And what if your Wi-Fi could fix itself before there's even really a problem? Xfinity is so reliable, it does that too.
What if your Wi-Fi had parental instincts? Xfinity Wi-Fi is part nanny, part ninja, protecting your kids while they're online.
And finally, what if your Wi-Fi was like the smartest Wi-Fi?
Yeah, it's Wi-Fi that is so smart it makes everything work better together.
Bottom line, Xfinity is smart and reliable. You deserve the peace of mind of having Wi-Fi that's got your back.
Xfinity. Imagine that.
Owning a home is full of surprises. Some wonderful, some not so much. And when something breaks, it can feel like the whole day unravels. That's why HomeServe exists. For as little as $4.99 a month, you'll always have someone to call. A trusted professional ready to help, bringing peace of mind to 4.5 million homeowners nationwide. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to homeserve.com. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
Now here's a highlight from Coast to Coast AM on iHeartRadio.
Filmmaker and author Jack Kelly and director of the Atlantis Puzzle is with us, and we're talking about newly retranslated Greek texts from Plato that suggest Atlantis may never have sunk beneath the ocean at all, but instead vanished beneath time, climate change, and most importantly, centuries of mistranslation. Jack, you were explaining sort of how this story came down to Plato of Atlantis and these 3 individuals sitting around trying to regale Socrates about Atlantis. So just carry on. What did they tell Socrates about this empire, this bloodthirsty empire, I think you call them, that actually attacked Athens and much of the Greek world centuries before?
Right. So this is a mysterious story, and when we end the Timaeus story, which is most of the text is this kind of philosophical text about the origin and nature of the universe and how human beings came to be in it and so forth. And you'd say, well, what's that have to do with Atlantis? So then that book ends, and boom, now here we are in the book called Critias, and this is where the character Critias comes back. He's jogged his memory, and he's got this story to tell that he heard long ago. And the origin of the story about this sort of prehistoric war that took place around 9600 BC between the hostile Atlantean Empire and the good guys, the sort of proto-Athenian people, and this Greek coalition that pushed these bad guys back and drove them all the way back to their capital city, where there was a terrible battle, and the gods became angered, and in a single day and night, Atlantis was struck, the capital city was struck by earthquakes and floods. And not only was it destroyed, but the Athenian army that had gone there to try and defeat these bad guys was also destroyed, lost in the earthquake, swallowed up by the earth. So this story, in all its sort of elaborate, descriptions and so forth in this book, Critias, is notable for 2 reasons. One, it supposedly came down to these characters sitting around there through Critias's ancestors, through Solon. well, how did Solon hear about it? And Solon, well, he was a Athenian statesman around 600 BC, but after he set up the Athenian government, he took off for sort of a sabbatical for about 10 years. And one of the places he went to was the Temple of Sais in the Egyptian Nile Delta. Now, this was a real place, and at that time period, there was a lot of exchange between the Egyptians and the Greeks. And so around maybe 593 BC, Solon went there to the Temple of Sais, and he starts talking with these priests there who are very educated and knowledgeable about the distant past. And so he starts kind of talking to them about, well, what the Greeks' version of the ancient past was. And he goes back farther and farther and farther. And look, inevitably at a certain point, history starts to blend into myth, and he tells them, well, we have these flood myths going all the way back to the Great Flood of Deucalion, and that's sort of what we know. And the Egyptians, these Egyptian priests in this massive temple there in the Nile Delta, they just kind of laugh at him. And he's like, well, what are you guys laughing at? And they said, well, you Greeks are always children. You don't really understand. You've lost all awareness of yourselves, and you don't even understand your own past. And Solon says, well, what are you talking about? And he said, well, first of all, there wasn't just one great flood, but at least three multiple great floods, and there were other great destructive events. And we Egyptians, we know about all this stuff because we got it written down here in our temples. And you Greeks, every time there's a big disaster or a famine or a flood or a comet striking the earth, your society gets totally obliterated. You get knocked back to the Stone Age, and you have to sort of start over from scratch. You've totally lost all memory of your own culture. And in fact, I'm going to tell you a story that shows that this is true. You don't even know about your own ancestors from 9,000 years ago who once defeated the Atlanteans. So then the priest goes on to kind of tell the Atlantean war story. Now, the other notable thing about this book, Critias, is that it's unfinished, right? The book kind of cuts off maybe about a third of the way through it. It's much shorter than Timaeus. So just as you're starting to really get to like the action and the war of the Atlanteans versus the Greeks, and how did this happen 9,600 BC? What happened? Well, the story just sort of cuts off. It ends mid-sentence. So for hundreds and thousands of years, a lot of people had assumed that Plato either lost interest in the story, or that he became ill and died before he could finish it, or maybe even that there was a finished version of it somewhere out there, but it just the manuscript had been kind of destroyed by time and the elements, and it was just lost to us, as many works of ancient authors have been destroyed by time. So
Right.
that's kind of the setup.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? Business software is expensive, and when you buy software from lots of different companies, it's not only expensive, it gets confusing, slow to use, hard to integrate. Odoo solves that, because all Odoo software is connected on a single affordable platform. Save money without missing out on the features you need. Odoo has no hidden costs and no limit on features or data. Odoo has over 60 apps available for any needs your business might have, all at no additional charge. Everything from websites to sales to inventory to accounting, all linked and talking to each other. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Are you a fraud-paying American? It's a fact that 1 in 4 honest, hard-working, tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity theft. With LifeLock Identity Theft Protection, though, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, and get you your money back. Last year, the IRS flagged over $16 billion in refunds for identity fraud. That's billions of dollars that could come from your salary, overtime, or second job. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second for your personal information and alerts you to threats you could easily miss on your own. And if your information does fall into the wrong hands, only LifeLock has US-based restoration specialists who are backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. Because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Visit LifeLock.com/iHeart and save up to 40% your first year. That's 40% off at LifeLock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
Forget whatever plans you have this weekend because you're staying at home and playing on SpinQuest. And there's never been a better time to sign up than right now. New users get $30 coin packs for just $10. All the table games you love with hundreds of slot games and real cash prizes. That's at spinquest.com. SPINQUEST.com.
SpinQuest is a free-to-play social casino. Void where prohibited. Visit spinquest.com for more details.
Did you know that parents rank teaching financial literacy as the toughest life skill? That's where Greenlight comes in, the debit card and money app made for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and track spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn how to earn, save, and spend responsibly, while parents have peace of mind, knowing smart money habits are being built with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/iHeart. That's greenlight.com/iHeart.
Okay, so let's talk about, again, getting back to George Serentides and this linguistic misunderstanding that has relegated the Atlantis story not only to the realm of fantasy, but has led people on these wild goose chases. Some people believe Atlantis is under the ocean near Bermuda. Some people, you mentioned the Azores believe it's there. Others believe it's somewhere else. What was this linguistic misunderstanding that led people astray?
Right. So, Richard, this was the crux. This is what hooked me into Serentides' ideas and said to me that this was worthy of spending years making a documentary and writing a book to get this story out to the world. So Serentides was a huge Plato fan. He was an engineer by training. He'd studied ancient Greek in university and high school and so forth. He was perplexed by the fact that Plato who was such a master of logic and such a philosopher. He said, why is this guy spending time telling stories and myths, and specifically why did he write this Atlantis story in the first place? So he started digging into it, and he started going back and reading through modern English and Greek translations of the ancient texts. And because he also read ancient Greek, he was looking at them side by side, and it's, the first thing he noticed was when you get to the part about, well, where was Atlantis? And the story says, well, you had to cross this body of water if you were going to Atlantis from Greece, called the Atlantic Pelagos. Well, that was translated as Atlantic Ocean. So all the old translations from the 1800s, by the way, these were the translations Ignatius Donnelly would have used in crafting his theories about the Azores. They all say, well, you had to go out past the Pillars of Hercules and cross the Atlantic Ocean. It was somewhere out there. But they also say a lot of other weird contradictory stuff that doesn't make any sense if you were going to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Like in their era, in other words, in the era of the story being told around 600 BC, the Atlantic Pelagos had silted up. Well, you and I both know the Atlantic Ocean has not silted up any time in the last, however many hundred millions of years. So what you're left with was this puzzle, and Serentides, it just dawned on him, this isn't the right translation. Pelagos is a word that's still used in modern Greek to refer to bodies of water like the Aegean Sea or the Ionian Sea or, maybe the Adriatic. These are seas that are partially enclosed by land, have islands in them and so forth. They're not oceans. And the Greeks had a different word for ocean. It was okeanos. from which we obviously get ocean. And to them, Okeanos, the ocean, was the body of water that extended all the way around Europe, Asia, and Africa, that was the world that they knew at that time. So you're left with this head scratcher, which is, okay, Atlantic Pelagos. You could just picture these ancient sort of guys from a couple hundred years ago in Oxford and so forth, scratching their heads and sort of saying, I say, Chauncey, have you ever heard of an Atlantic Pelagos? No, I have not. And it must have meant the Atlantic Ocean. Righto, old chap, carry on. So what these guys translating the story didn't have the advantage of is we have a modern understanding of climate science where we understand the climate has changed. And so these guys basically just made this assumption, hey, I've never heard of an Atlantic Pelagos. Sea, ocean, potato, I guess he meant the Atlantic Ocean. Because that was the only body of water named Atlantic that they knew about. Well, what Serentitus realized is, hey, Plato's a very specific linguist, right? He uses the word Okeanos in other books he's written. If he meant to say ocean, he would have said it, but he didn't. So he meant something specific with those words. And I like to give the examples that the ancient Greeks had several different words for bodies of water that we just call sea. Like the Mediterranean was a thalassa. That's what that meant. What we call the Black Sea today, they called the Euxenios Pontos, which meant a brackish sea that was friendly to strangers, right? It's very specific, right? That what that body of water is. So I think it's the equivalent of somebody conflating the Hudson River, the Hudson Bay, and Hudson's Pond or something like that, right?
Right. So the idea is ocean was mistranslated. People thought Pelagos meant ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, so they were looking beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is Gibraltar, right?
That's the other key piece of the puzzle, Richard, is today that's what the Pillars of Hercules refer to. And that all started around the time that the Romans conquered the entire Mediterranean, and that's where the Pillars of Hercules kind of became fixed there. But this is the other astonishing thing, is when Serentitus went back and did some research, and anybody can go out and, by the way, and corroborate this. You go back to different ancient authors of the ancient Greek era, and the Pillars of Hercules appear in multiple different places around the Mediterranean. There was even a Roman author, Tacitus, who said there were Pillars of Hercules up, in the North Sea at the mouth of some river. So what does this mean? It must mean something different than just a single fixed place. And so maybe this had a more symbolic meaning. Now you have to get into some more of the nuance, and without going into too much of the detail, essentially Serentitus used the grammar of the story, the specific words, and an awareness of what those words meant at that time in history, right? What the connotation of the word was, right? And I give the example, the word gay means something very different in the 21st century than it meant in the 19th century. There's lots of examples of this. So he actually took the trouble to go back, look at the connotation of all the words Plato was using for his geography, and came up with an astonishing conclusion. And that conclusion was the Atlantic Ocean had nothing to do with it. To get to Atlantis from Greece, you had to cross the Mediterranean and then pass through the mouth of an outlet of a river that entered the Mediterranean. You had to enter a sea called the Atlantic Pelagos, and from there you could access sort of the interior of the Atlantean continent. And through doing all this research, he could only sort of pin this to one place, and he said, this has to be part of North Africa. There's no other explanation geographically that makes any sense. And through a series of logical deductions, so forth, he kind of came up with a schematic of what Atlantis, the continent, looked like. And lo and behold, this is where the moment came for me of superimposing that on sort of Northwest Africa. And the fit is astonishing.
So we're talking about the Sahara, correct?
Yes, the whole sort of northwestern part of modern Africa.
Right. What was the Sahara like? We're talking 10, 12,000 years ago. What was it like back then?
Well, that's the other remarkable piece of this puzzle is you say, well, today the Sahara Desert is this kind of enormous wasteland, and the myth describes all this lush greenery and waterways and all these different massive lakes and seas and rivers and so forth. So even if Serentitus was sort of right about the schematics and the directions and the grammar, well, how could any of the story possibly have any truth to it, right? So what you're talking about is this notion of climate change. And I know that's a very popular buzzword these days, but I think it's hard to impress in our minds just how drastic natural climate change can be. And there's something when you go back 8, 9, 10,000 BC, the era of the Atlantis story, we call this period the Green Sahara.
Listen to more Coast to Coast AM every weeknight at 1 a.m. Eastern. And go to coasttocoastam.com for more.
It is I, George Washington. Let me tell you about a President's Day sale from Big O Tires. No, listen to me. I'm the honest one. I got this, Abe. It's really no big deal.
I'll make the declaration. I'm on the $100 bill.
You're not even a president, Ben.
Now through February 22nd, buy 3, get 1 free of 4 select in-stock Big O branded tires with installation purchase. Big O Tires, the team you trust. Installation required. Disposal fees and shop fees extra where permitted. See store for pricing. Eligibility may vary. Not valid with other offers.
Forget everything you had planned for this weekend because you are sitting on your couch and working from the comfort of your own home. I'm here with SpinQuest, where you can play hundreds of slot games, all of the table games you love, and you can even win real cash prizes. New users, $30 coin packs are on sale for $10 at spinquest.com.
SpinQuest is a free-to-play social casino. Void where prohibited. Visit spinquest.com for more details. This podcast is supported by FX's Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. The new limited series executive producer Ryan Murphy. It explores the complex courtship of the iconic couple considered to be American royalty, whose love story captured the attention of the nation. Their fairy tale romance would unfold in front of the public eye, where their private love would also become a national obsession. FX's Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. Watch now on FX, Hulu, and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers.
Did you know that parents rank teaching financial literacy as the toughest life skill? That's where Greenlight comes in, the debit card and money app made for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and track spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn how to earn, save, and spend responsibly, while parents have peace of mind, knowing smart money habits are being built with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/iHeart. That's greenlight.com/iHeart.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human. This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
In the middle of the night, Saskia awoke in a haze. Her husband Mike was on his laptop. What was on his screen would change Saskia's life forever.
I said, I need you to tell me exactly what you're doing. And immediately, the mask came off.
You're supposed to be safe. That's your home. That's your husband.
Listen to Betrayal Season 5 on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather. In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was nature, trees, and praying, and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
Back then, I lied to everybody.
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'm going back to my hometown to uncover the truth. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
14 years in prison for killing a young woman. A 15-year sentence for a crash that caused 3 deaths. 12 and a half years for killing a child and critically injuring her mother. All true stories, all caused by marijuana-impaired drivers. No matter what you tell yourself, if you feel different, you drive different. So, if you're high, just don't drive. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Are you upside down in your trade? Is your interest rate too high? Are your monthly payments making you verklempt? Do not worry. At Volkswagen Southtown, we bring you payment relief. We fund your trade, and we will buy it with the regional base MSRP, deducting for mileage, manufacturer incentives, und any little bumps or bruises, ja? Und ohne dir Lederhosen. You'll also skip your payments for 90 days on your new car. 90 days, no payments. Swap out your car today and get payment relief. Visit VWSouthtown.com.
Some restrictions apply. See dealer for full details.
Welcome to the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network. Now get ready for Strange Things with Joshua P. Warren.
Welcome to our podcast. Please be aware the thoughts and opinions expressed by the host are their thoughts and opinions only and do not reflect those of iHeartMedia, iHeartRadio, Coast to Coast AM, employees of Premier Networks, or their sponsors and associates. We would like to encourage you to do your own research and discover the subject matter for yourself.
Get ready to be amazed by the Wizard of Weird. This is Strange Things with Joshua P. Warren.
I am Joshua P. Warren, and each week on this show, I'll be bringing you brand new, mind-blowing content, news, exercises, and weird experiments you can do at home, and a lot more. On this edition of the show, can you see the Matrix with this new method? And fossilized human shoe prints? Question mark? Exclamation point? How does it all tie together? Well, we'll see if we can make it fit somehow. Would you like to be able to see the Matrix with your naked eyes? I'm talking about being able to, squint your eyes in a certain way, and suddenly, before you see all around you what looks like programming code, zeros and ones just flowing up and down, maybe even side to side, three-dimensionally, and you say, oh my gosh, I knew it. I can now see that I am immersed within some kind of a large holographic system. This is a big holodeck straight out of Star Trek, and I am part of a computer program, and who knows exactly who the programmer is. I guess that's what one might call God. On the other hand, maybe it's much more complex than that. Well, we're going to get into that in a minute, because there are people out there right now, maybe you've seen this, who are saying that they have been able to achieve this, and I'm going to tell you what they are doing and what they are claiming that they are seeing. But first off, let me take a moment just to ask you, sort of like, if you could see the Matrix like that, do you think that would help you make your life better or worse? Would it just freak you out too much and you'd rather just not know, just be ignorant? Or would you like to see it and give yourself an opportunity to try to tap in there and do some programming? Hack into reality. And I get so many emails all the time, as you know, from people who share some of their deepest thoughts with me. And I get a fair share of emails from people who say they're really frightened right now about just the state of the world and where everything is heading. I understand people have always sort of felt that way, though. I mean, if you think things are bad, for example, right now here in the United States, well, don't forget about a time called the Civil War, when for years hundreds of thousands of Americans were doing their best to slaughter each other every day. I mean, like, we've had some pretty dark times in this country. People are often saying, I have a problem with how this politician or that politician is doing things, and that's good. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. I think that Jefferson said something like that. It's good to stay on top of it, but also you can waste your time a little bit and not look at things from the proper point of view. Let me explain what I mean by this. It reminds me of this Greek story, an ancient Greek story about the sword of Damocles. You know this one? So basically, Damocles was what was called a courtier, or he was sort of an advisor to a king in the king's royal court. And the king, who was considered a tyrant, was named Dionysius. So Damocles is in the court, and he's an advisor to the tyrant king Dionysius. But Damocles is always kissing up to the king and telling him about, oh, how great it must be to be a king, and how fortunate you are, and how wonderful, how blessed you are, praising the luxurious life of Dionysus. And after a while, the king gets annoyed with this flattery. And so he decides to hold a lavish banquet. And he calls Dionysus and he says, Dionysus, I tell you what, for all of your assistance to me, we are going to trade places for an evening. And you are going to be able to sit in the king's seat at the banquet, so you can have an idea of what it's like to be a man with this kind of power. And so, of course, Damocles is overcome. He happily takes the seat, and he's sitting there feasting away, and at some point during his meal, he happens to look up and realize that there is a razor-sharp sword that is hanging directly above his head. And it's held there only by a single horsehair. So it takes him a second to realize there is this sword over my head with a horsehair holding it. At any moment, a million things could happen. The wind could blow the wrong way. Somebody could come up and cut that thing. And boom, he's toast. So at this point, Damocles suddenly he realizes there is an imminent threat, and he immediately jumps up out of the seat and says, "No, please, king. I'm happy with my old life." And the lesson here is that he realizes that power and luxury, and this thing that we associate with some of these leaders and politicians, is not what it's always cracked up to be, and that what they get in return is they live in constant fear, anxiety, and so the sword of Damocles, it symbolizes this impending disaster or a looming threat, representing the inherent perils of being in powerful positions. And so you have to ask yourself before you start being too critical of how politicians handle things, whether or not you would want that job. Okay, so it just reminds me of that when people email me these types of messages, and I think it's important to think about, because some people say life is short, some people say life is long, but you may as well enjoy as much of it as you can. I think a lot of people have lost someone recently. I've been hearing about a lot of different loss. And I want to tell you this just as an interesting little celebrity story that I've probably never talked about before, that you might appreciate, because Gil Gerard recently died. And Gil Gerard played Buck Rogers on television. And he was 82 years old, and I don't know exactly what he died from. I'm not sure that they've actually said. Okay, that's right. Here it is. A rare and viciously aggressive form of cancer. So it doesn't say specifically, but my understanding is that, like, you know, he was told he had cancer, and then within days he was dead. It was like one of those things. But I bring this up because back in around 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, I was working on a television program with a director named Jim Castle, and Jim had worked on the X-Files, and he had worked on Cheers and a lot of big stuff like that, and he was a fan of my show. And so maybe around like 2008, something like that, he and I were talking, and I mentioned to him that when I was a kid, I loved the TV show Buck Rogers. And I mean, did you ever watch that show? I used to actually dress up and play Buck Rogers. And I know you might be like, you like Buck Rogers? Were you born in 1925? Were you into Howdy Doody also? And I was like, no, I mean, I'm going to be 50 years old this year. And Buck Rogers came out originally, that show, in like 1978, 79, something like that. So, yeah, I was a kid, and I would dress up, and then later when my sister was born, you know, we would dress up and take cardboard boxes and make little spaceships, and we would play like Buck Rogers. So, anyway, I tell you this because, by the way, that theme music, da 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 da, and it had that bass guitar. Used to love that music. And I actually interviewed a man named Stu Phillips one time, who was a composer, and I believe that he not only worked some on that, but he was the guy who solely composed the music to the Knight Rider TV show. Anyway, I have too many side notes and offshoots. So anyway, around 2008, my friend Jim Castle, he said, "Oh, well, you're into Buck Rogers." He says, "I know Gil Gerard. Would you like to interview him on your show? He'd probably be happy to do it." And I said, "Oh yeah, are you kidding me? Absolutely." So I got in touch with Gil Gerard, and when we come back from this break, I'm going to tell you what happened about, you know, my interaction with Gil Gerard. It's just, and then we'll get into the main topic here. Can you see the Matrix with this new method? And then how does all this tie into fossilized human shoe prints? I'm glad that you can keep up with this. I barely can, and I'm the host. But if you like this show, well, you have to support it. Do me a favor. It doesn't cost you a penny. Go to joshuapwarren.com. Right there on the homepage, sign up for my free and spam-free e-newsletter. It takes you 2 seconds. You put your email address in there, you hit the submit button. When you do that, you will instantly receive an automated email from me with links to some free online digital goodies that you can start using immediately to start making your life more magical. So please sign up at joshuapwarren.com. It's right there on the homepage. I am Joshua P. Warren, and you're listening to Strange Things on the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network. And I'll be right back.
Hey folks, we need your music. Hey, it's producer Tom at Coast to Coast AM, and every first Sunday of the month, we play music from emerging artists just like you. If you're a musician or a singer and have recorded music you'd like to submit, it's very easy. Just go to coasttocoastam.com, click the emerging artists banner in the carousel, follow the instructions, and we just might play your music on the air. Go now to coasttocoastam.com to send us your recording. That's coasttocoastam.com.
At the UPS store, we have the key to unlock the world of possibilities because we'll sign for your packages and protect them from porch pirates. Most locations are independently owned. Product services, pricing, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS store. Be unstoppable. Come into your local store today.
Big dreams don't just belong in your imagination. At Canyon View Credit Union, we help turn those dreams into reality. From application to celebration, we're by your side every step of the way.
Because home isn't just a place, it's the people you share it with. At Canyon View Credit Union, flexible loan options and expert guidance help you create a home that's truly yours. The perfect place to gather and belong. Guiding you home. Canyon View Credit Union.
The Coast to Coast AM mobile app is here and waiting for you right now. With the app, you can hear classic shows from the past 7 years, listen to the current live show, and get access to the Art Bell Vault where you can listen to uninterrupted audio. So head on over to the coasttocoastam.com website. We have a handy video guide to help you get the most out of your mobile app usage. All the info is waiting for you now at coasttocoastam.com. That's coasttocoastam.com.
The Art Bell Vault never disappoints. Classic audio at your fingertips. Go now to coasttocoastam.com for full details.
Welcome back to Strange Things on the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network. I am your host, the Wizard of Weird, Joshua P. Warren, beaming into your wormhole brain from my studio in Sin City, Las Vegas, Nevada, where every day is golden and every night is silver. Agitato Zume. And you know, when Gil Gerard was about 60 years old, he was extremely unhealthy, extremely overweight, and he underwent gastric bypass surgery, and they did a special, a whole TV show about it on, I think it was maybe Discovery Health or one of those channels, and that just did wonders for him. And so when I met him, actually, well, when I first started talking to him, he was, I guess, like in his early 60s, and he had like this whole new lease on life. And so he came on to my show, which at that time was called Speaking of Strange. It was a live radio program that I broadcast from Asheville, North Carolina, every Saturday night for 3 hours. He came on and he was great, you know, which he phoned in, and I interviewed him for at least an hour, and we had wonderful conversation. It was amazing to talk to this guy who played this on-screen hero that impressed me enough when I was a kid, you know, that I would emulate that, you know, with childhood role play. But he's very charismatic, and after that, he and I started talking just, you know, privately on the phone. The first thing that I was surprised by was that, you know, he always came across very debonair as a character. He was great at acting that way. But when you started talking to him in person, he was born in Arkansas, and he just kind of considered himself a good old boy. And he was proud of that. And he liked to talk about hunting and fishing and going out and doing, you know, country things. And he had a lot of strong political opinions that I think were probably not very popular in Hollywood, which may explain why that some of his work started to dwindle over the years. He also would use surprisingly coarse language sometimes, even with people he didn't know very well. And trust me, look, I got a dirty mouth, but I'm just saying, like, I'm usually a little bit more careful about it. And he just seemed to like be okay with using some. I can tell you some stories, but obviously, you know, I can't use those kinds of words on the air. So you never knew what you were going to get with him, but it was so fun interviewing him that it became a little bit of a tradition. Like, at least for 2 or 3 years, I would interview him in January. And finally, I talked to him on the phone just privately, and I said, you know, I have this script for this movie called Shelton Arl Massacre, about this incident that happened in North Carolina during the Civil War. I'm interested in producing it. Would you be interested in acting in it, you know, even starring in it? And he said, absolutely. So one night, Lauren and I drove down to Atlanta, Georgia, which is where he lived. And I finished doing a show. I think I finished on a Saturday at like midnight or something, and then we got in the car and we arrived right in the middle of the night in Georgia. I got to the hotel room. There was a big banner, "Welcome Joshua P. Warren," and there was chocolates and all these different treats. And I was to this day, I think he must have arranged that, but I don't know. So anyway, the following day, Lauren and we went to an Applebee's, and we were sitting there at the table and look up, and lo and behold, here comes Buck Rogers. And he walks in, sits down, and it's just the three of us. And we had a great conversation. You know, as a matter of fact, he said, one thing that was very interesting to me is because I was fascinated with how his career developed. Obviously, we have a lot to talk about in this show, and this story is getting too long already. But what I will tell you is, he said, well, you know, for a little while, I was a movie star, not just a TV star. And I said, oh, is that right? And he says, yeah. He said, when Buck Rogers originally came out, he says it was originally at the movies on the big screen, and it was a big hit, and I was a movie star. And then all of a sudden, you know, I'm a TV star because nobody remembers that I was a movie star. So he was very upset about that. But anyway, so we decided we were going to start pursuing this. And I started helping him out with his website design. Mobius helped him out with that. And we had made some possible plans for him to come to Asheville and do like a personal appearance. But the fact of the matter is, I came to find that he was very, very suspicious of any kind of a business deal. And I think that's because he always thought that he got kind of screwed over by Hollywood. And he became more and more difficult to work with. And so eventually, I can't remember exactly what happened, but we just sort of parted ways, which was sad. But on the other hand, I mean, like, what I can tell you is he was a very complicated man. He could be a very charming, warm individual. That's why he was a celebrity. But then he could turn around and he could be vicious also sometimes and kind of overreact to things. So he was kind of a tragic figure in that sense, I believe. But I also hope that he had, you know, an enjoyable life. Heck, like I say, he was 82 years old, and I sure enjoyed meeting him. You know, they say don't ever meet your heroes. Well, I don't entirely agree with that because I'm glad that I met him, and I wish him well, and I thank him for all the friendship, and also just, you know, coming on to my show for years and being such a great guest. So hopefully Buck Rogers is out there really exploring the stars now, huh? Gil Gerard, how about that? Born January 23rd, 1943 in Little Rock, Arkansas, and then died there in Georgia, December 16th of 2025. You know, it's funny, I was speaking of like your heroes and all that. You know, Thomas Edison, the great inventor, was dear friends with Henry Ford. Those guys, they would travel all the time, all over the place together. And they would go to the Grove Park Inn in Asheville and vacation together. And Henry Ford especially just sort of idolized Thomas Edison's talent. And who wouldn't? I mean, Edison was one of the most profound geniuses who has ever lived. And so when in 1931, Edison was dying of complications from diabetes. And it was pretty apparent to everybody that Edison was dying because Edison was an old man. Let's see, how old was Thomas Edison at this point? When he was on his way out. He was born in 1847. He died 1931, so that made him 84. So yeah, I you know, again, a guy with a long life. But as he was on his deathbed, Henry Ford contacted Thomas Edison's son, Charles. And Henry Ford made this very strange request. He said, Charles, will you do me a favor? Will you take a rack of test tubes and just put them, open test tubes, just put them right there on the bedside next to Thomas and capture his last breath? And Charles said he would do it. And sure enough, Those vials were there when Thomas Edison took his last breath. Charles was prepared. He immediately sealed them all up with paraffin wax. And then he sent one to Henry Ford. And to this day, if you go to the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, there is one of their most famous displays. It's a test tube sitting right there. And it is the test tube that contains Thomas Edison's last breath. You know, I don't know where the other ones are. I was trying to find out. I didn't look too deeply, but it seems like that maybe the rest of them ended up with the Edison estate. Boy, if any of you ever find one of those, an actual example of, you know, one of those test tubes with Edison's last breath, I think that would look awfully nice in my collection. Oh well. What do you think about this idea, though, that people are just a bit of information? That when you die, you don't really die. That you just sort of you transmit yourself onto some other place in space-time. Well, recently people have been contacting me and saying, have you heard about this method that you can use, supposedly, to see the Matrix with your naked eyes? All you need is a laser and some drugs. And I'm not joking. Apparently, this started becoming popularized by a guy, and I don't want to use his name, but by a guy who claimed that he had been taking DMT for years, and that I guess I should pause and say, like, there are a lot of different people from different backgrounds who listen to this show, and not everybody knows what DMT is. DMT, dimethyltryptamine, is a hallucinogenic psychedelic drug. Okay. And I've never taken it, so all I can do is tell you what I am reading about it. It has this rapid onset, intense effects, and a relatively short duration or action. A duration of action. And for those reasons, DMT was known during the 1960s as the businessman's trip, because he could have a full-depth psychedelic experience in less time than using other substances. When we come back, I'm going to tell you more about this methodology and what I think of it. You take this drug, and then you take a laser. I'll explain best I can, and we'll see how legit this is. I'm Joshua P. Warren. You're listening to Strange Things on the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast Paranormal Podcast Network. And I'll be back after these important messages.
To announce that our Coast to Coast AM official YouTube channel has now reached over 300,000 subscribers. You can listen to the first hour of recent and past shows for free. So head on over to the coasttocoastam.com website and hit the YouTube icon at the top of the page. This is free show audio, so don't wait. coasttocoastam.com is where you want to be. The internet is an extraordinary resource that links our children to a world of information, experiences, and ideas. It can also expose them to risk. Teach your children the basic safety rules of the virtual world. Our children are everything. Do everything for them.
On the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network. Listen anytime, any place.
to Strange Things on the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network. I'm your host, Joshua P. Warren, and this is the show where the unusual becomes usual. You know, I just realized it's time for a Buck Rogers reboot. Maybe I should be in charge of that. I need to buy the rights to Buck Rogers. If any of you big film producers out there want to work with me to make the new Buck Rogers, or to make finally a movie from my script for the Shelton Laurel Massacre, which I actually own, just contact me. All right, so DMT. Dimethyltryptamine. I've heard about this for years. So, okay, look, who can describe what a psychedelic experience is like? Like, it doesn't matter. Everybody can try in his or her own words who has had one. But, you know, all I can tell you is that this DMT is illegal, for one thing. They say that it does occur in its most basic form naturally in many plants and animals. In fact, if you go and look at the history of it, they say DMT derived from plant-based sources and has been used as some kind of a ritualistic psychedelic in South America for thousands of years, and then it was first synthesized, turned into a real condensed chemical in 1931 by a Canadian chemist. And so some people, they say they've taken thousands of these DMT trips, and they say they're totally fine. But look, I don't know. Again, I've never taken it. I have no desire to take it. But the story is that started a few years ago that's been gaining steam. Is that there's this one fella who discovered that if you take one of these hits of DMT and then you take a laser, okay, so what we're talking about here is just like a basic 650 nanometer red laser pointer, and you just turn that laser on and leave it on in a straight line in a dim room, you can get right up there close to it, maybe a few inches away from it. This is my understanding now. And you look into that beam, and that is where you will see the Matrix rolling by. This cascade of symbols, these characters in this, you know what I'm talking about, like that Matrix-style green code. And it kind of emerges from the laser sparkle. And so some would think of it as being a divine code. And I have talked to people who have seen things that look like computer symbols or computer avatars and stuff like that floating in the air before. I don't want to get into that right now, but I mean, I've heard them. And there are videos you can find from people sitting there and they're staring at a laser and they're like, oh, whoa, this is trippy. And they start talking about seeing all these things. And so there's this phenomenon out there of people who are saying you can use this to see the Matrix. And some people have been asking me what I think about it. Here's the reality, okay? To do this experiment, you would have to do two things that you should not do. Okay, for one thing, you're supposed to take DMT, which is, in most cases, an illegal drug. I don't know if it's totally illegal everywhere, probably not, but in most cases, DMT is illegal. So you'd have to take an illegal psychedelic drug. And the second thing is, you would have to get your eyes really close to a laser beam. And I don't see these people wearing safety goggles when they're doing this, by the way. And I know that you're not like looking directly into the beam. Duh, I get that. You're it's shooting past you, and you're kind of looking off to the side. I understand, but still. So look, is there a truth to this or not? The fact of the matter is, there's no way to determine this because it is completely subjective at this point. If it were possible for a camera to somehow capture this phenomenon, okay, fine. But by subjective, I mean, like, if you had two different people, let's say you and I both took DMT, the same dosage, we sat down next to each other, we turned on the same laser, and we looked at it. What if you saw these codes and I didn't? Or what if we just saw different numbers and letters? You know, who's right and who's wrong? You know, a hallucination is something that comes from within one's own mind. But what we're interested in is whether or not there's an actual code that we all have in common here in this holographic reality. So all I can tell you is that this may or may not work for some people. For the reasons I just cited, but you know, it is an interesting concept. It's something that cannot be safely proven or disproven as far as I can tell. But you know, if you could see the code, and you could not only see it, but at that point kind of record it, would that give you such ability to start tapping into reality that you could not only hack your life path, but hack space-time itself, so that eventually you could even travel through space-time? Can humans someday discover this matrix and then plug into it and start using it to literally travel through time, into the future, into the past? And you might say, well, that's a heck of a stretch, Joshua. Well, no, it's not. No, it's not. Because if you can see a code there, well, now you can start working with it. You can't really work with something that's invisible. It's like trying to fight the invisible man. But if everything is built of this code and you can start manipulating it, well, then space and time should also be manipulatable. And this is interesting to me because a guy that I used to interview from time to time that I thought was just one of the best who's ever lived when it comes to doing this kind of research was Brad Steiger. Super nice, intelligent, warm guy. I never got to meet him in person, but we had plenty of great phone conversations. He wrote this classic book called Mysteries of Time and Space. He wrote a lot of books, of course, if you know anything about him. I'm holding a copy right now of this book in my hands. Let's see, this was published in 1973, it looks like. Mysteries of Time and Space by Brad Steiger. One thing that I remember being fascinated by when I read this is that there is a chapter, it's toward the beginning of the book, I guess, and it's called Footprints in the Sands of Time. And he talks about these cases in which supposedly, like, modern human shoe prints have been found thousands of years ago. And that, in fact, one of these even was provable because the footprint included a trilobite, you know, one of these little, I don't know, little bugs or whatever they were. Little arthropods that lived back in those days. Kind of looked like a little, I guess what a trilobite is. He wrote in this book, he says, William J. Meister is a supervisor with Hercules Incorporated. He is a self-described rock hound and a trilobite collector. On June 1st, 1968, Meister, his wife, and two daughters, together with some other couple, they arrived at Antelope Springs, just northwest of Delta, Utah. On the third day, while they were at their camp, Meister, his wife, and their four girls found some trilobite fossils. Trilobites, they lived in the Cambrian period of the Paleozoic era. Let's see here. Because that is, so they lived about 600 million years ago. These compact little creatures with their bodies divided into 3 longitudinal segments are among the earliest fossils known to man. Well, Meister broke off a rather large 2-inch thick slab of rock, struck it on the edge with a hammer, and in his own words saw it, quote, fall open like a book, and to his astonishment he saw, quote, on one side the footprint of a human with trilobites right in the footprint itself. The other half of the rock slab showed an almost perfect mold of the footprint and fossils. Amazingly, the human had been wearing a sandal, end quote. The dimensions of the sandal were an excellent perspective that, 10 1/4 inches, 3.5 inches wide at the sole, 3 inches at the heel. And I was like, you know what's ever come of that? Because that's not the only one he talks about. That may not be the one where he talks specifically about people finding like tennis shoe prints and all that. But I was like, oh, what's the latest on that? So, because I figure, I mean, this is a legit story. There, in terms of like there being a legit artifact. So what's happened to it? Or a legit specimen, I should say. We're up on a break. When we come back, I'm going to tell you, I did a follow-up on this. I will let you know what I have discovered scientists have said, because sure enough, this is a real specimen, and there are other similar real specimens. And I was actually surprised to some extent by what I learned. I'm Joshua P. Warren. You're listening to Strange Things on the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network. And I'll be right back.
Champlain. Please make sure and check out my show, Shades of the Afterlife, heard on the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network.
My name is Mark Rollins, president of ParanormalDate.com. Over 5 years ago, George Norrie approached me with a unique concept, a dating site for people searching for someone with interests in UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, conspiracy theories, and the paranormal. From that, ParanormalDate.com was born. It's a unique site for unique people, and it's free to join to look around. If you want to upgrade and enjoy more of our great features, use promo code GEORGE for a great discount. So check it out. You got nothing to lose. ParanormalDate.com.
You're listening to the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network with the best shows that explore the paranormal, supernatural, and the unexplained. You can enjoy all shows on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Welcome back to the final segment of this edition of Strange Things on the iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network. I am your host, Joshua P. Warren, and is it true that a trilobite was discovered, crushed in a human footprint? By the way, trilobites, I couldn't think of the word I was looking for. They don't look like snails. Look like snails, I guess, are called ammonites. A trilobite looks more like to me, kind of like a tiny horseshoe crab or something like that. Anyway, I'm not an expert on ancient ancient creatures by any means. Okay. Is there any truth to any of these kinds of stories? Well, according to credible sources on the internet, Paleontologists looked specifically at the Meister print there from Utah and identified it as a natural spalling, which are rock slabs breaking in patterns that mimic shapes, not even a human print. And so no trilobite was actually crushed by footwear pressure. There's another one known as the Nevada shoe print, which was a rock from the Triassic layers, allegedly showing a shoe sole with stitching, which is, I guess, more of what I was also thinking of. Geologists attribute it to a natural concretion, which is a mineral accumulation, blah, blah, blah. So basically, every time you've heard a story where they say there's evidence of of a modern human shoe print that's been fossilized, or of a human footprint that's fossilized, like stepping on top of a bug, scientists are saying, look, no, we have explained all that away. But here's what surprised me. There is what scientists would say is a legit recent discovery. In 2023, there was a study that analyzed ancient footprints from South Africa's Cape Coast. And we're talking about going back 150,000 years. It says these lack individual toe marks and have crisp, rounded edges resembling hard-soled sandal prints rather than barefoot tracks. Researchers experimentally recreated similar marks with simple footwear, suggesting that early humans may have worn basic shoes far earlier than previously thought. So basically, that's not going to rewrite history and give us proof that people traveled from the future into the past wearing their Nikes and stepping on all of these little creatures, and we just happen to luck across that fossilized footprint. Boy, that'd be lucky, wouldn't it? But we do have evidence that thousands of years ago, long before people were thought to be wearing shoes, apparently they had some kind of a basic shoe figured out. So, and just in case you're one of those guys like me who read that kind of stuff when you were a kid, and you're like, wait a second, what's the follow-up on that? Well, now you know. I'm always here to give you the straight dope. So sometimes there are things that are extraordinary, sometimes they're not. In this particular case, I have to believe paleontologists and the archaeologists and the anthropologists and all those people are right. It has been a while since I have read listener emails. I've been getting behind, so let me try to squeeze some in before the end of the show. This came to me from Marie. Now, if you're new to the program, I have a website that's running right now. It's called therealblackmailbox.com. Therealblackmailbox.com. And I'm actually typing it in right now to make sure everything's still good with the site, because you know how that goes. Yeah, okay. Therealblackmailbox.com. It's a long story, but if you go there right now, there's an email address, and you can send a wish to that email address. And when you do that, it gets projected into a system that goes to a portal that I set up on my property next to Area 51 here in Nevada. Okay, so anyway, that's what she's talking about. She went to the website and she put her request in, and here's what her subject says. Here are the results I got from mailing through therealblackmailbox.com. Marie says, Joshua, I just have to tell somebody what happened. I listened to your show for the first time about a month ago, and your story about your black mailbox and sending messages to God out into the universe. Well, I have to tell you what happened to me. I had requested two things. One may be impossible, but the other, well, I had requested that I be given back my original ruby necklace that my grandparents gave me clear back in 1979. I wanted it with all my heart. Well, I didn't get that exactly, but I think the universe did its best to give me as close a jewelry as possible. I still would like the original, but here's what I got. On November 29th, my boyfriend that I have dated for over 20 years gave me a ruby necklace out of the blue and ruby earrings on a silver chain. It happened less than a month after my request. I did not tell my boyfriend or anybody about my request, and this was amazing that I got a ruby necklace and earrings in less than a month's time. I feel it was the universe's way of doing what it could to answer my request. What happened was amazing. I think it was the universe and God reaching out to me. Can I make more requests for through the blackmailbox.com? Yes, you can. And again, that website for all of you who are just now tuning in, it's the realblackmailbox.com. The Real Black Mailbox. Anybody can go there right now. Tell all your friends. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to sign up for anything. And you just email your requests, and all the information is there that explains sort of what this is about. But she said, that was a real wow. Please write me back soon. It worked. Well, thank you, Marie. That's a wonderful message, especially for this time of year. And you know what? Keep going. There's no limit. Keep doing it. Keep sending stuff. Here's another I'll try to squeeze in. This comes from Gerard. He says, "Sir, in episode 2 of your Strange Things podcast, you described being at Myrtle's plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana. You were in General David Bradford's suite, and the entity there knocked 3 times each on the door, table, wall, and headboard. He said some things are noteworthy. Number 1, it responded to polite requests. Number 2, it knocked on different surfaces upon request. And number 3, it did not change its pattern of knocking 3 times per surface, no matter the surface. You could not get it to knock once for yes and twice for no. So here is the simple solution. Designate distinct surfaces as yes or no, not the number of knocks. For example, politely request the entity to knock on the side table near the chair for yes, and the wall near the chair for no. Because it responded to politeness, it should cooperate with you and use the table for yes and the wall for no." And let me pause and say, you know what? That's a very good point. And, when I wish I thought of that when I was in the middle of the situation in this creepy haunted room all by myself. It was kind of